Right, we are live. Hello, happy Friday, guys. We are more than halfway through our book study. So I'm wondering how many of you are hanging in there with us. I know it's pretty typical that you start something strong and then, you get, life gets busy and you get less committed. And we're really in the favorite parts of my book. All of this stuff, the meat in the middle is so exciting. And I am thrilled to introduce, sort of, depending on what questions you guys ask, my co-host today. His name is Jerry Brown, not the Jerry Brown mentioned in chapter 13 as Mo's business partner, but the Jerry Brown that raised me. So, Dad, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yep. A couple cool things about my dad. He is one of the sailors in the Navy who got to Master Chief the fastest. And he was also known in all of his squadrons and all of his dealings as being the Master Chief that never cussed. And so what's interesting about that is we know we can make certain assumptions about life in the military and the kind of standards and behavior that was expected. And also it's pretty cool to be able to think about having someone kind and loving with very high moral standards for themselves here to talk to us about set high standards. Hi, Dad.
Hello. How are you?
Good.
Hi, everyone out there. Glad you're with us today.
Yep. So, Dad, talk to me a little bit about some of as a supervisor in the Navy and as a Master Chief, some of the ways that you saw the standards really make one of the momentum builders that we talked about before we came on. When standards are clear, decisions are easy. So how did you see that showing up really in your career?
Well, one of the, as I came up through the ranks and kind of transitioned from worker bee into supervisor and what I found was that if you set clear expectations, then and those expectations are such that they can be inspected, can be quantified. You know when that has been met or not met. Then it's easy. One of the things that you had to do as a supervisor is write performance evaluations on the people that work for you. And these were, in the military, these are life-changing documents. They can make or break you in terms of your promotions and in your career in the Navy, because the Navy and in the big guys have set certain standards in terms of who they want to retain in the Navy. So, you expect your personnel to certainly minimum standards, but once you have set the expectations for your personnel, you know exactly, and they know that you know, all right? So then, as they're doing their various jobs and performing, then you can evaluate them against those standards. And one thing that I like to do, the official evaluation was only once a year. But what I used to do is sit down with my personnel on a quarterly basis and say, okay, this is where you stand today. This is what you need to work on. And this is why I see it that way. What are your feelings? How do you see that? And then that way they knew exactly where they stood. They knew what they had to do to improve their performance evaluation for that annual evaluation that meant so very much to their careers.
Wow. So let me ask this, Dad. I know, just because obviously I had a front row seat, I know that in your circle and your friends with some of the military people that you served with, I know that you had a lot of respect and that people had confidence in you. What role do you think clear expectations and standards played in that relationship
there's two ways that you can communicate expectations and standards. One is with verbal or written communication. The other is by your example, and that the personal standards that I had for myself were such that I would never ask any of my troops to do something that I wouldn't do myself. I remember one time we had a helicopter was up on jacks, and a piece of equipment called the TACAN was in the nose of the helicopter, and we had to replace it because it was bad. And I'd asked one of my troops, I assigned him the job, and came back in, and he told me that he was just not comfortable, working at the nose of the helicopter when it was up on jacks. I said, okay, no problem. So I went out and changed the TACAN. And I showed him that, I would not have asked him to do a job that I thought was unsafe in any manner. And I showed him that, not just by telling him, but I went ahead and did it. So I think the example, I didn't go around, for example, telling folks, oh, don't cuss in my presence, don't tell a dirty joke in my presence, don't do that. It became very apparent to these folks that I didn't cuss, I didn't drink, and sometimes they come in and and you're right. There's that old adage, cuss like a sailor, and for the most part, it's pretty true. Most of them do. And there is a certain culture where you kind of have to be somewhat of a swashbuckling, person, bigger than life, because you're in the Navy. But that just wasn't my style at all. So I stayed true to myself and my religious beliefs. And, that was evident to folks that interacted with me. And it got quickly in each place that I went, it became very apparent to them. And sometimes, maybe one of my chiefs or instructors would come in and they were upset over something, and they'd let out some cuss words, and all of a sudden it was, oh, excuse my French. And it's like, well, I've never heard any French like that. But less, they recognized that in my presence, they felt they became uncomfortable doing that, and so just, staying true to myself and to my beliefs, setting that bar high and making sure that I got there every day was the way that it came across.
That's interesting. I'll tell you what, I don't think I would ever let a bad word fly in front of Mo. Nope, not happening. And
I don't believe I would either.
right. So what's interesting is, whoops, I just knocked my tray. What's interesting about what you said also is that you were consistent in all of your standards. And I think that that's really helpful in people knowing what to expect. Because when you set high standards, if they're not consistent, then people don't actually really know what their performance and behavior should be. So let me kind of switch gears a little bit. There was several times in the book, in The Joy-Filled Life, Mo talks about different situations where, and Mo was also, like you, a Christian, and she also had very, very specific, non-negotiable high standards. And there were times where Mo was expected to handle a situation as a Christian, like turn the other cheek, and this person doesn't actually get consequences, they need grace, and just some of those misconceptions about Christianity and kindness being weakness and that sort of thing. So talk to me about a time where you were loving and you stuck to your standards, even though, you know what I'm asking?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's, having people work for you in the military is a little bit different than in the corporate world. It's like they have to get pretty bad to actually fire them, get them kicked out of the Navy. So a lot of times you have to really work at it to work with someone that is one of your problem kids, and because you can't fire them, and unless they get bad evals and really get nasty or go AWOL or something, you just have to deal with it. I had a situation where, and this was actually one of the tougher things I had to do, I guess, as a supervisor. I had a young man that actually just kind of went off the deep end mentally. And he was really, he was a nice guy, but he started going around not only our squadron, but other squadrons and other places within the facility. And he was leaving these notes on people's desks about, and it was like, Jesus loves you, God wants to save you, things like that. And, but someone came to me and said, hey, I've got a complaint about George. And, he's kind of been doing these weird things, So, I didn't directly supervise George. I had a petty officer in between us. And I just said, look, I need to talk with George. There's some stuff going on. And I said, I'll fill you in later. So I sat down with George, and it was readily apparent that he did not have it together anymore at all. He could barely put a sentence together. He couldn't follow our conversation at all. And so it was necessary. He needed immediate mental help. And so I conferred with my division officer. We called our flight surgeon, who came over and sat down with George, and they took George straight to the hospital. I talked with George a little bit. I don't know how much sunk in though, but it was definitely hands-on, and it's like, man, caring for you right now is bigger than anything else we're doing. It's bigger than being in the Navy. It's bigger than getting that airplane fixed. Fixing you is the priority, And afterward, after George had left to go to the hospital, I needed to write an evaluation because they ended up deciding that it was going to be in George's best interest and that of the Navy for George to go ahead and be medically discharged. And so I had to write an eval, which was, it couldn't be a good eval at all. And I was used to writing probably mediocre to really good evals. I never had to write one where it was just downright, this is going to get you out of the Navy. And so I managed to get it written. And as I passed it, up the chain of command, it was almost like the Holy Grail, because no one else, wanted to touch it as far as writing it, but they were really amazed at how loving and caring me and the Navy came across in this really bad evaluation of George. So, it's just, you get people with that many people of such a diverse group, you can come up with all kinds of situations, so, but that's the one that kind of sticks out to me, was trying to help George get on the right foot.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because I know, Dad, I don't know how far you've read in the book, but Mo talks about a situation where someone within the company was doing something, and you know, she said, well, we cannot be in business anymore. And the person's like, but aren't you supposed to forgive me? And she says, well, you know, I forgive you and we can't be in business anymore.
Right.
Because there's that assumption that, so how did clear expectations and setting high standards also serve you in, and by the way, Wendy and Dana, welcome. Meet my dad.
Hello. Hi.
How did it serve you also in your parenting? Hi, Dad.
Hello. Well, it was, quite honestly, I probably could have done that better, but, you know, setting reasonable expectations, you know, for the appropriate age, and then, you know, just following up with them. Because again, it's a situation where when those expectations are communicated, then I know, the kids know, and the kids know that I know. So therefore, there's no excuse. If you botch something up, if you're not in on curfew time, or you don't get such and such chore done, whatever it may be, yes. The fact is, both of us know what the standard is. And now we both know that perhaps you violated that standard, and you know what the consequences will be.
It's so interesting because I've heard you say 3 times, now you know, and you know that I know. And I think it's interesting because we always think of high standards as sort of coming from a top-down kind of place. And standards are also just bottom up, like they just make it a very equal, hey, this isn't a personal thing. This is here's the expectations. It's interesting because you know, right before we went live, we talked about how when the expectations are clear and standards are clear, like Mo writes in her books, decisions are easy. And what's interesting about that is it's so true, and it makes things not personal.
Exactly.
It makes things not personal. Hold on, someone's raising their hand. Hello, I'm unmuting you and I have no idea who you are. I only see a phone number. Are you there? 405-642-8618.
Oh, that's me. I think it might have been by mistake.
Hi, me who?
Kim next. I don't know.
Oh, hey, Kim. How are you?
I'm
Okay.
sorry. What do I
That's
do?
okay.
To unmute?
Okay, well, I'll mute you again then. I thought you had a question.
No, I don't know what happened.
Okay. So Dad, one other question. How do you, guys, this was really interesting. So for those of you that came in a little bit late, I introduced my dad, and he was in the Navy, one of the people that went from enlisting to Master Chief the fastest. So he was promoted very quickly, and he also had a reputation for never cussing. And of course, we joked about how, well, I'm not going to let one fly in front of Mo either. And so we were talking a little bit about these standards. And Dad mentioned before we went live together that he felt that kind of the Velvet Hammer, the name Velvet Hammer, and that Mo was a kindred spirit. Dad, what things did you identify with in your military career and as a Christian in a position where you must set high standards? How did you feel that kinship with what you read in Mo's book?
Well, I think I kind of connected with her on a couple of levels. One was she talks about not necessarily having the greatest knowledge, and she, I think, specifically mentioned financials, but she had the drive, all right? And, you know, as you go up the ladder in supervision, it's not quite as important if you know everything as it is to have key people in key positions. And if you have the right people in the right position, then they're aware of that. And then they report to you. So you don't have to necessarily be the subject matter expert of everything to be able to be successful. And that's the way, Mo talked about that, she didn't really know financials, but had this drive about, setting the standards and getting the standards out, to all of the franchisees and affiliates and, she was establishing a culture. Okay. And unfortunately, going into the Navy, oftentimes the culture is kind of set. And even transferring between different duty stations, there are different cultures within each of those organizations. And you kind of have to adjust to certain things. But the nice thing about having your own high standards is that, you don't have to do a lot of adjustment. You just be yourself. And you'll find that the people that you work most closely with will start, adjusting and adapting to you. And so I identified very much with her drive. And then certainly, as a Christian, I identified with the fact that sometimes you're placed in a position where I don't want to say that people want to mock you, but if they know you're a Christian, they kind of expect a higher standard from you. And they also, like Mo mentioned, they think, oh, well, Christians are forgiving and, so just, forgive me, whatever. And so I identified with that. I personally, as you know, Missy, my dad died right after I turned 11 years old, and I'm the baby of the family by many, many years. So I grew up without any real male influence in my life. And I was kind of thinking about, where my influence came from. And I honestly have to say, I believe it's Jesus. And my drive, I believe, really kind of stems from when, Jesus was talking, and I think it's in Matthew, the book of Matthew. But there was Roman conscription at that time, at the time of Jesus, because, the Roman Empire had spread. And so Jesus is telling the Jewish people who were allowed by the Romans to worship, Jesus said, look, if a Roman soldier comes by and wants your coat, give him your shirt too. If he wants you to march with him 1 mile, go 2 miles, So it's like that extra effort in there. And that's what I incorporated into my life, even at a very early age. And so I definitely identify with Mo's drive and kind of the no nonsense set of standards. These are the standards, and I expect you to live up to those. So and certainly with her faith, I can identify with that.
Yep. Well, what's interesting, one thing I absolutely adore about Mo, and I know a lot of people feel this way too, she's so kind and so loving, and you feel just really blessed and encouraged anytime you're able to be around her or in a conversation with her, learning from her if she's teaching, and watching the combination of those really, really high standards and an unwavering commitment to them. And then also seeing the kindness and the love and the graciousness. It's absolutely amazing. And so, of course, I thought of you. So for those that just joined us, Dad used to spank me while laughing, because he would sit up against the edge of the bed he'd bust out his Bible. He would read from Ephesians 6. Is it Ephesians or Galatians? Children, obey your parents.
I think it's at the end of Galatians.
Anyway, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And then we would discuss whatever infraction. And Dad would say either or a lot. And I would sit there and count it. And then at the end of his dad's speech, I would tell him how many times he said this thing. And then he would laugh and get tickled, and I would laugh. And you know what happened right after that? I would still get my bottom spanked. So he would be laughing like, ah, ha, ha, and then I would turn to tears, and then he would hug me. And anyway, it's just interesting. It seems like there's so many places in the world where kindness and standards don't seem to fit together, and yet they should absolutely go hand in hand all the time. There's a book, I don't have it with me, it's called Radical Candor, and it's by Kim Scott, I think, and it talks about how if you have too much candor, then you're just mean without that kindness. If you have too much kindness, then you're just weak, and it's inconsistent, and people don't feel confident. And then when you have the right combination of the two, people can trust what you say, and they know that you love them. Anyway, it made me think of that. Well, what questions do you guys have for my dad? Oh gosh, look at the time. Just kidding. Dad, thanks for coming on.
Oh, sure. I'm really honored to be able to do it.
Any questions, any ahas and takeaways from this chapter? I think it's interesting. I think one of the things that stood out to me that Dad also hit on is in this chapter, Mo talks about feelings of inadequacy and not being qualified for this position. And Dad, you specifically mentioned the financials that she felt like she didn't understand, and she just kept moving forward anyway. So I thought that was really interesting. I loved that.
Something that rang pretty true for me was how when you're both on board with the standards and you both know what's expected, it's a whole lot easier to hold people accountable and also to be held accountable. I've had some jobs in the past where expectations were unclear, and you'd have a meeting and they're asking you all these questions and you had no idea that you were supposed to be doing those things or doing them in a certain way. And so they're disappointed and I'm disappointed, and everybody's just, when you're not on the same page, it's terrible. So having that clear communication to where standards are crystal clear and everybody knows what's expected makes working together so much easier.
Absolutely.
Leilani, has your mama ever laughed when she spanked you or grounded you or punished you? Do you need me to unmute it? It's not unmuting for whatever reason. Oh, there we go.
There you go.
I can hear you.
Yes.
That's my kind of mama. Like, you're in trouble and we're still having fun.
She doesn't get spanked very often. Now this
I know
one,
why.
this one's a whole nother story.
Hi.
You can just see the little orneriness in his face, can't you?
Which one?
Oh, yes.
Mo's
on
not
this.
on this one.
Oh.
Hi.
Hi.
This is Missy.
Hi, Missy.
That's her dad,
Hi,
Jerry.
how are ya?
Anderson,
Hi, Steve. Heather.
And Heather.
Yeah.
Hi, Heather.
And of course, these days, his favorite title is Grandpa.
Absolutely.
Yep. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming. We've got 3 more sessions next week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Heather will get the study guides out. And hi, Wendy. I was wondering if I got to see your face.
Yeah.
Wendy, Dad, Wendy.
Hello, Wendy.
Did you have something to say, Wendy? I'm unmuting you real quick. I'm not sure if I can get the mutes and unmutes to work faster. I don't know what I'm doing. There we go.
Okay. Hi, Dad.
Hello, how are you?
Good. I actually want to introduce my daughter because I'm driving her to college right now. So I'm super sad. I've been telling her every week about my show. Hello. Say hi.
Hello.
That's
Hey.
Chloe.
Exciting
Hi,
time.
Chloe.
I'm so sad. I'm taking her away to college. She's been home with me since the middle of March.
Well,
Very
call me
sad.
later if you need a good
But
cry.
Okay. I love listening to your dad and great to meet him. And it always gives you a good perspective on why people are as strong and confident and who they are comes from their parents. So this has been a pleasure. Thank you
Oh.
for sharing.
Yeah, I'm pretty proud to be the daughter of a Master Chief.
Thank you.
All right, guys, we'll see you next week. And Dad, thanks again for being here.
You're very welcome.
Love you.
Love you too.
Bye.
Bye.